Hello, social media. So I typically do stories on my Instagram and things like that, but this is a little bit bigger, so I'm making a video and gonna put it out there. I am trying to make sense of what's happening in the world. I think a lot of people are, but a lot of people also just have their own lives. People just work hard, they have kids, they have hobbies, they have shows that they're really into, and they're just kind of not paying attention. And I get it. But I'm an educator, I'm a lifelong learner, and I'm a very curious person. So I'm trying to make sense of it. I'm trying to figure out what's going on. So just like Charlie on Always Sunny in Philadelphia, I'm putting these things together. So I made this little list. The first thing is a crisis of education, my field. In education, I've been teaching for 15 years in very diverse communities. And what I've found is that the education system, the way that it is, tends to exchange imagination and curiosity for compliance. Think about what makes a good student. They're compliant. They do what they're told, right? So that seems to be the case, especially at elite private schools. And I've taught both public, I've taught charter, and I've taught private schools. And these elite private schools have a lot of that. There's a book, Excellent Sheep by William Dershowitz, that goes into that. Basically, people become sheep. So teaching builds students to become compliant adults. And this is the way it was designed back in the day, right? Like this is going back to Rockefeller and stuff like that, saying we need workers, so let's build compliant adults. So our whole education system is built on compliance, especially at the top private schools, built on compliance. Right? So these are the people who are going to become doctors and CEOs and things like that. It's not based on critical thinking. It's not based on instilling courage or even like life skills, really. It's just about compliance. Do this, do this, do this. So I think that is kind of like the first domino, is this crisis within the education system. The second is the crisis in leadership. From that, what's the next natural step, right? The next natural step would be our leadership are not acting like leaders. So I talk about the three tests often, which is the Asche test, the Milgram Experiment, and the Zimbardo Experiment, or the Stanford Prison Experiment. And one, it's about abuse of power in the Stanford Prison Experiment, which has some issues because they actually chose the people to be the guards and be the prisoners. But that natural selection happens because who gets to leadership positions? More aggressive people. And those more aggressive people get to those positions of power, then they will be more aggressive. The Milgram Experiment, that if you are given kind of a green light to behave poorly and even hurt people, many of us will. And then the Asche Experiment, which is a conformity experiment, that most of us will conform. We'll look left, look right. Wherever they are headed, we will head to, even when we know it to be false, even when we know it's not true. So that is the crisis of leadership that we're in. And this goes to the private and public sectors. Both of those have leadership. So this could be in politics, this could be in corporations, and the leadership is failing. The leadership tends to be more of the people that can't pass the Asche test, the Milgram Experiment, and the Zimbardo Experiment. The third kind of step in this that I'm trying to piece together here would be a crisis of unregulated capitalism. Capitalism is good, but it needs to be regulated. That's why we have the public sector, regulatory institutions. Unfortunately, they are not doing their job. They have been outsourced to the massive private sector. So this comes through lobbying. This comes through connections between Washington, D.C. and major corporations, or even state governments and major corporations. And big corporations are getting away with doing terrible things. We know this. We know this from the housing market crisis in 2007, 2008. We know this from the history of the pharmaceutical companies and things like that. We know that this happens. We know that the regulating agencies are not able to regulate. They're not able, they're not willing, they're incompetent. That's happening. So then there's major investment firms like Blackrock. Blackrock has tremendous chunks of stock investments in pharmaceutical companies, including Moderna and Pfizer, in legacy media companies like New York Times, CNN, etc., and big tech companies, Facebook, Twitter, etc. So the same entity owns all of these things: big pharma, big tech, big media. Okay, these big agencies like Blackrock and others. Okay, they own all of this. So they're all working together. It's a trust. I teach about the robber barons. And they were trusts, and they all work together to do what? To gain profit. Not just profit, but shareholder profit. Shareholder profit. So shareholder profit, again, this is not necessarily something that can be stopped, because it's an infinite growth model. People have their 401ks tied up in Blackrock and places like that. So we need an infinite growth of all of these companies. They have trillions of dollars invested. Trillions. Okay, and their profits are going up, of course, because they're all working together. Media is working with pharmaceutical companies, is working with tech companies, and they're all working together to gain profit for all the entity at the very top, which is the result of unregulated capitalism. The reason why people are like anti-capitalist, like Bernie Sanders and stuff like that, is because if unregulated, it gets out of control, it gets too powerful, and actually becomes more powerful than the government, which is what we saw in the Gilded Age as well, until Teddy Roosevelt came in and started to move things around a little bit. But this is what has happened before, and seems to be what's happening now, that we know that these big investment firms own all of these different entities. And then they have tremendous connections with the regulatory agencies and with the governments, the government of America, and also all the governments around. It's a multinational, these are multinational investment firms. So it's not just the American government, it's all of the governments, because money talks. Okay, the biggest lobbying industry in the country, in America, is pharmaceutical company. The second is insurance companies. So it's like healthcare. So working together to gain profit is the goal. Okay. And then the kind of fourth and fifth would be this control for society, because we have to keep this infinite growth going. So there has to be a control over society to get them to keep this train rolling. So one is the censorship of dissenting voices. Anyone calling us out. I am shadow banned. I'm a school teacher forming hypotheses and asking questions. What we're supposed to be doing in school. And I get shadow banned. People who are experienced in virology and stuff like that, like Robert Malone, are getting kicked off of Twitter, shut down. Politicians, even some that say wacky things and stuff like that, but elected officials like Marjorie Taylor Greene, or even a sitting president under Donald Trump, are then taken off of their platform to connect and share information and stuff like that. So censorship of dissenting voices is something that is going on right now, and it's voices that are calling out exactly like what I'm pointing out here. That's essentially what gets censored. And I think the people doing the censoring truly believe it. They believe that they're doing good. I think that's true. I think a lot of people believe that they're doing good. The corruption has led to the corruption of institutions, corruption of college campuses. The university system has lost their way. If you listen to Yeonmi Park from North Korea talk about it, or you take a look at the peer review system. Who pays for a lot of the labs at major universities? Corporations. So these major corporations are also paying for the research done at these universities. That's where the grants come from private companies. The private companies support the data that's created at universities. And then things like the peer review system have been corrupted in areas that you can see in the Boghossian, Helen Pluckrose, and James Lindsay hoax papers. In those hoax papers, they made nonsense scholarship, and it got passed through the peer review system because of the ideological leanings of people involved in the universities. Okay, so they're ideologically possessed as well. So the universities are not producing good scholarship. They're becoming activist, critical social justice stuff, and they're becoming labs for data for the big corporations. That's what's happening in universities. It's not about free thinking like it once was. And this is going to lead to what Robert Malone talks about as mass formation psychosis. No drop of rain feels responsible for the flood, and no snowflake feels responsible for the avalanche. But we are all involved in this system where a few big entities, even at the top, even Larry Fink at Blackrock, believes he's doing good. He's helping people with their retirement funds and stuff like that. So there's not a single villain here. It's not Donald Trump. It's not Joe Biden. It's everyone involved is doing their little piece, trying to get their little piece for their family, for trying to get power for them because they believe that they're doing good with power. We all believe that with power we will do good. And I think that what's going on with everything going on with COVID around the world, the regulations, the lockdowns, the push for the vaccines, all of that kind of stuff, I think it's complex. I think there's a lot of good and a lot of bad with all of it. But I do think what I've laid out here is fairly undeniable as that is happening. How much that is affecting what's going on with all of our issues with COVID and with social unrest and all that kind of stuff, I don't know. But I wanted to put together this kind of connecting the dots to see if this makes sense. And I'm putting it out there because I really value this community to call out bad ideas, to try and form hypotheses, because I, as a school teacher, I tell my students all the time, I'm the first leg of a relay race. I'm running and here's the baton. You guys take the baton and go off and do your own work. I appreciate you very much.